Okay, guys, this is our second lecture looking at environmental conditions or weather conditions and athletics. Last time we looked at heat-related issues. Today we're going to be focusing on cold and then some additional conditions such as lightning and wind. Okay, we're going to start with cold. So with heat, one of the big extenuating factors was humidity. Cold has another factor that's outside of temperature that makes it worse. It is moisture and wind. Okay, so anytime that you have high wind or you have somebody who is damp, that's going to make the cold feel a lot worse. Okay, so part of that is in the same mechanism that we use to cool ourselves down with sweat. If you have water on the body, it's pulling heat out of your system and cools you down. Okay, so we call that wind chill. And I will show you a chart on the next slide where you can see kind of the impact the wind has on how temperature actually feels. Okay, so with wind, the faster it is, the more it is, the colder you feel. And if you are participating in cold weather sports, which isn't such a big deal for us in Southern California, you have to prepare for that. Okay, so whether that's layering of clothes, dry clothes to get into afterwards, things to warm people up like blankets, hot water bottles, hand warmers, etc. All right, so this is the wind chill chart. So if we look at temperature of 30 degrees here, which is just about freezing, if it is calm, no wind, that's what it feels like. Okay, if we have a little bit of wind, 5 miles an hour, it's going to feel 5 degrees cooler, go all the way down to 25 degrees. If it is a really strong wind, so we're looking more towards like a hurricane or a storm level wind, 60 miles an hour, that's going to pull the temperature, how it's going to feel, all the way down to 10. So that's a huge drop in temperature just because of the presence of wind. Now, if you add that this person is wet as well, it's going to make it even worse. Okay, so our first cold weather condition is hypothermia. Root words there that you should know what this means immediately. Hypo meaning low, thermia meaning temperature. By definition, hypothermia is when your core temperature drops below 95 degrees. Okay, so if you think we're supposed to be at 98.6, going down to 95, that's not a huge drop. That could, push you into hypothermia. That's what, 3.6 degrees. Okay, this can happen in Southern California, even on a relatively warm day, if you are stuck in, submerged in water. So like if you're out, surfing and you get caught in a rip current and pulled offshore, and you're surrounded in a much cooler body of water, it can pull your temperature down to cause hypothermia. Hypothermia is fatal if left untreated or unmitigated. Now, normally when people die of hypothermia, it's not because they decide, oh, I'm not going to go and see anybody about this. It's normally because they're trapped in that situation. They're in kind of a wilderness environment where there is no help available. It's not like they're choosing not to treat it. Usually that lack of treatment is forced on them by the situation. So in terms of athletics, the people who are most at risk for hypothermia are going to be winter sport athletes like climbers, mountaineers, but also people like endurance runners who are, out away from immediate help. Okay, so if we look symptomatically, the things that appear, obviously we're going to see the first body response, which is shivering. So that's excess movement generated to try and generate extra heat and warm you up. Things that will follow will be slurred speech as your nervous system is slowed down, and confusion. Okay, so your body starts or your brain starts functioning not as well. So actually, people with hypothermia often make really poor decisions. There's been, instances of people dying of hypothermia 100 yards away from their front door, just because the body's telling them, "Oh, sit down and rest." And they think that's a good decision because of the confusion that it causes. Okay, so we see cyanosis as well, which is pale and blue skin, and a decrease in pulse and consciousness. Now, if you're in a situation where somebody is hypothermic and they are no pulse, do not pronounce this person dead. The longest people have ever survived with no pulse and no breathing is in a hypothermic situation. Okay, so there's a saying in EMS is they're not dead until they are warm and dead. Okay, let's look at treatment. So immediate treatment for hypothermia. Let's take my glasses off. You want to remove and replace any wet clothing. Okay, because wet or damp clothing is going to pull their body temperature down. You want to remove that straight away before you try and actively warm anybody, because that's going to be pulling heat out. If you are trying to warm somebody and you have a heat source, you want to place it close to the armpits and groin so that you can warm circulating blood and warm them from the inside out. You want to apply blankets above and below the person. Okay, often they're going to be sat or stood against something cold, and you want to put a barrier all the way around them. Okay, so they want to be on a blanket and under a blanket. You should hope to see improvements in the first 10 minutes. Obviously, it depends on the severity. But if they're not improving at all, then this is definitely a situation where we want to get EMS involved. In terms of preventing hypothermia, the first thing is you got to have a plan. Okay, so if you know you're going into a situation where there's a likelihood of you being cold, you take extra clothing, you take things that are going to be able to warm you up. You take dry clothing and you layer your athletes so that they're not getting cold. Listed there as well. Layering is really important. Okay, and covering extremities. These are often the parts of the body that get the coldest the quickest. And when we talk about frostbite, I'll explain why that is. But extremities, looking at ears and fingers, toes. Okay, so our next condition is frostbite. By definition, what frostbite is freezing of skin and tissue. And ultimately, that stops blood flow into the area. So when they freeze, they're getting less blood flow, so they start to cool down, almost exponentially quicker. This can lead to permanent damage in the affected area. Okay, symptoms that we see initially is going to be aching, tingling, numbness of that affected area. At first, it will turn white, which we call frost nip. If it's left untreated, it's then going to proceed to turn black as the freezing of the tissue occurs. That's full frostbite. If this is left untreated for any amount of time, it's going to lead to amputation of the fingers that are affected. Okay, so immediate treatment is obviously we want to contact EMS straight away. If they are wearing any jewelry, you want to take it off in case it causes swelling. If you have a ring on and then the finger starts to swell up, that ring can impinge on the finger and cause more damage. You want to slowly warm this person up. Okay, so because their hands are numb, you don't want to stick them in boiling water because of the damage it can do. So you want to slowly warm them up, and you want to avoid rubbing. The reason we avoid rubbing is that tissue is frozen solid and it's really brittle and easy to damage by rubbing. Okay, so we want to just dry and cover and slowly warm it up. In terms of prevention, the parts of the body most affected by frostbite are going to be extremities. So nose, ears, lips, fingers, toes, those are the parts of the body that most often get damaged. And you can go Google some like frostbite nose and see some people with amputated noses and fingers. Decided not to put that in the slideshow for you. The reason why extremities are the most susceptible to frostbite is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they get less blood flow. Okay, so if you think about the middle of your arm, you have like that giant brachial artery running through it. By the time it gets to the fingers, it's just a capillary. Okay, so you're getting smaller blood flow. The next thing is the volume to surface area ratio. Okay, so the extremities, like the finger, has a small internal volume, but it has a lot of exposed skin. So it has, the ratio of surface area to volume is really high. Okay, and that causes it to cool down more quickly. Okay, so you're not going to get frostbite of the abdomen. because there's a huge amount of warm volume there to a relatively small amount of surface area. Okay. Let's pause there. I'm going to break it up into 2 videos, and then we'll look at what lightning is and the damages it can do.